This is week 3 of our Turning 30 series, and by way of introduction, you may have heard me tell my little made-up story about how 30 years ago, at my 30th birthday party, my parents called me into their room and told me that I had to move out of their house, and gave me a note which said, "Steve, you're 30, and it's time for you to grow up, get a job, and get a life." We as a parish, we're 30. We need to grow up, to mature as Christians, get a job, so that we can discern what God would have us do with our lives, more like a mission or a ministry. That's today's topic. And get a life. Find fulfillment by dedicating our lives to others. Now, by way of introduction to all of the Roman Catholic nobility present, 30 years ago, Bishop Barbarito was then doing Father Chuck's job, working as Chancellor for the Diocese of Brooklyn. Chancellor, Vicar General, very similar. Father Chuck, 30 years back, was doing Father Don's job at the end as pastor of the newly formed St. Peter Parish here in Jupiter, and Father Don had just turned 20-something, and was discerning his calling to the priesthood while working as assistant headmaster at Marianapolis Prep School in Massachusetts. Father Jean was a correspondent for a French magazine, Jean Bolin, and freelanced for Vanity Fair. Father Chimindra, for all I know, was admiring his new facial hair in the mirror for hours at a time. And I'll leave the deacons and the rest out of it. And you ask, Steve, how did you find all this out? Did you hire investigators? Did you make a series of phone calls around the country? No, I just spent a couple of minutes earlier this week at the font of all knowledge. I Googled it. The world has changed a lot in the last 30 years. And by the way, Father Jean corrected me, it turns out that was not him, the correspondent for a French magazine. That was some other guy with the same name. And there's nothing about Father Chimindra on Google from 30 years ago. He's an enigma. And so is Google. Data without a filter can be a dangerous thing. I read an interview recently in Barron's magazine, where the author implied that for many people, Google has become God. If you have a problem, turn to Google. If you want to know something, anything, turn to Google. If you're feeling any of the needs from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just turn to Google and you can get started on anything your heart desires, from ordering a pizza to answers on moral issues. And if you don't like the answers that you get, particularly on matters of faith and morals, you just need to click down to the next resource, and maybe they will provide a more palatable response than the challenging one that you were just reading. The fact that Google has an answer and that those answers are presented as fact by a system which has grown more and more intelligent over the years, this has created the perception of a fail-safe system for knowledge or even wisdom. It's scary, and it's only going to get more and more efficient as years progress in finding that balance of providing information and selecting the appropriate advertiser to put with that information in front of you when you type your question. For many, the cloud of unknowing and wonder, which is God, has been replaced by the cloud, presenting certainty and materialism to people who are looking to feel something, anything, in a world which seems devoid of love. And unfortunately, that certainty is not absolute. Example given being Father Jean, the famous author. This is the world we live in now, though, and nothing against Google either. It's merely an unfiltered source of information, which by design and as a business should be used with a degree of caution. I'm merely establishing a need in our society where people are so desperate for something to grab onto that they use Google as a replacement for God. It's not depressing at all. It's not. We as Christians have hope and we have a job to do. Get a job, remember? And probably better, again, called a mission or a ministry. Along the materialistic vein, though, here's a quick story that you probably heard. Shoe company sent 2 salesmen into the Amazonian jungle to sell shoes to the tribesmen. One of them sent a message back almost immediately with his sample case and said, "This is hopeless. Nobody here wears shoes." The second salesman sent a message that said, "Send more samples. Nobody here wears shoes." It's all about perspective and hope. The need is here in Jupiter, and as people of hope, we ask ourselves, what is it that God would have us do with our lives? Fill the need. And you ask, am I qualified? Pope Francis gave a homily at a baptism a while back. He said, baptism is the reason for our hope, and it should inspire us to give off our light, even in the most mundane or difficult moments throughout our day. He's saying that if we are baptized, we should be giving off our light, and since we merely reflect the light of Jesus, no qualifications are required. If you are baptized, you have what it takes. And how do we go about bringing the light of God to the Google darkness? Look at the second reading. If you don't speak Spanish, I've got a little part of it for you. St. Paul explaining how to properly evangelize the world by using the example of how he and his team evangelized the people of Thessalonica. We were gentle among you as a nursing mother cares for her children. With such affection for you, we were determined to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our very selves as well. So dearly beloved had you become to us. You recall, brothers and sisters, our toil and drudgery, working night and day in order not to burden any of you. We proclaim to you the gospel of God. This is how to, and the gospel is how not to. I don't mean to overdo the message here, but in the first week of our series, we talked about how our priority of what we do as Christians should be love. And last week, I may have sounded a little preachy when we talked about a mature Christian being one who puts love over law. Now we have these clues from St. Paul on how to do that job, a roadmap. Gentle as a nursing mother, with enough affection to not just share the gospel, but our very selves as well. We don't bring burdens to others with our faith. We bring freedom. The more we believe that ourselves, the more likely it is that our message of love will be received by others. That's why we should all be growing and maturing as disciples. We are loved first by God, then we must love. Allowing yourself to be loved and delivering that message of love to others is your job. The Pope concluded that baptismal homily by saying, what a grace when a Christian truly becomes a Christ bearer in the world. That's your job. Theotokos, God bearer. That's you. You could let it get to your head, right? But the gospel reminds us, the greatest among you must be your servant. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. We need to empty ourselves in service to others and allow God to fill us up. And as we empty and fill ourselves, even just the tiniest bit, we become an army of love. And whoever stands in our way is going to get love all over them. The town of Jupiter will never be the same. This week, pray for one person that you know needs to feel God's love in their life, especially if that person is you. See you next week.